I thank the gentleman, and now the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Ross, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. You know, having just come off of an election, as all of us have, I doubt there was any of my colleagues, including myself, who campaigned on Basel III or Solvency II or IAIS. And yet the impact of these regulatory schemes have a significant role in the end user, the consumer. And believe me, coming from Florida, I come from a state 7 years ago decided to affect the markets in a regulatory and statutory form by overexpanding a property insurance company that was run by the state, owned by the state, and backed by taxpayers, only to affect a below-market rate. And what we have here is somewhat the antithesis of that. And Director McGrath, I truly appreciate your confidence here about being at the table and using the analogy of the Chicago Bulls. I just don't want us to have the luck of the Chicago Cubs when it comes to having our role at the international table. Now, I think that having the representation of the NAIC is very, very important. Ever since the McCarran-Ferguson Act, what we have in place, I think, is one of the best things that this world economy has seen in providing consumer protection, solvency, and a good regulatory scheme for domestic insurance. And yet I still have to question why FSOC decides to want to put into place the designation of 3 domestic carriers as SIFIs. And my question to you, Mr. McCraith, is that an indication that the state regulatory scheme is not sufficient if FSOC's putting into play 3 domestic carriers as SIFIs?
Congressman, the Council is guided by the statute. The statute establishes the legal standard, which is whether the material financial distress of the firm could pose a threat to
and I think that because the lack of transparency there as to what designates a SIFI for the insurance companies is obviously an obstacle or hurdle we're trying to overcome. But that also goes to the problem that we're having today when we're dealing with international standards. Now, Director McCraith, you said in your testimony that international standards are not themselves self-executing. I agree with that. We don't have to accept them. But by their very nature, are they not self-limiting? In other words, if we don't accept them, are not our domestic carriers going to suffer at the table?
There are 3 phases in the process. One is the standard setting. The second is testing before implementation. The third would be implementation. Our view is right now we're in the early stages of development, Congressman, and the best thing we can do is work together to provide U.S. leadership in the international standard setting.
And I appreciate that. And in that leadership, and Mr. Sullivan, I'll ask you this question. I mean, any increase in capital standards is going to ultimately lead to an increase in the product. I mean, granted, I know that Commissioner Constantine talked about how that it's going to tie up capital and keep from expanding and creating jobs. But ultimately, in order for these carriers to stay in business, they're going to have to seek other recourse, which is going to most likely be if capital standards increase and the product price is going to have to increase. Would you not agree?
I would agree, but we haven't reached a point to determine whether or not additional capital is required yet.
And I think that's important. And I think that's where I guess what I'm getting at is that we have to be together. We have to deal from a position of strength here. We have probably the largest number of premium out there, absent health insurance premiums in the world economy. We've got to go into these, not just one person at the table who has an insurance background, but I think a concerted effort that what we have in place, it may not be the best system ever designed, but it's working very well. And to that end, I would just ask Commissioner Constantine, what do you see as a hurdle in putting us at the table with the IAIS in trying to make sure that we're not just jammed with some capital standards that we're going to be left to take de facto, if not by way of the rulemaking process?
Thank you, Representative. I think part of it, again, is putting together the team that we have. But the next step, and I think the more important step that we're engaged in, is putting the ideas together in some form that we can offer an alternative to what's already being pushed by different parts of the world. We need a solid U.S.-based proposal. We're working on it. we'll get there. But that is, to me, the turning point in this discussion.
And Senator, I just want to tell you, I as a past board member of NCSL, as a past member of NCOIL, I laud you for what you're doing, and I think the best impact we can have is at the state level to make sure that our constituencies understand the significance that when those rates go up, not because of an insurance commissioner, but because of an international standard, our methods of recourse are going to be severely limited. With that, I'll yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Now